Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video I have my Retribution Paladin guide, mostly PvE, for the Shadowlands, although some things are all-encompassing. It's going to be for 9.0, very first one. It'll be updated as the expansion continues, either with big patches or just with changes to Rep Paladins. There are a couple caveats before we get completely started here. One is that something I learned in BFA is a large portion of the community does not want to hear just simulate it. So while I will tell you to simulate it if that's the best option, I will also give you a generalized informed opinion about the choice as well. That way, for those people who don't want to, they can at least have some sort of guiding hand to maybe help them out. Other than that, the other caveat is that I was looking at the numbers, and most people are just playing Kyrian and Venthyr for Rep Paladin, and so I will have the guide framed through those eyes instead of anything to do with Necrolords or Night Fae. I'm not against that. I'm very open to people picking the covenant that they want to pick. Not hating on anybody for your pick there. However, for the purposes of these videos of getting the most out of your class, essentially, or spec, it doesn't make sense to do that when so few people are playing them overall, and I will show you a picture of that graph just to kind of prove that that point. So let's go ahead and get started. We're actually going to start with the talents, simply because it kind of sets up everything else. So sequentially, it just makes sense to do so. In the first row, we have Zeal, Righteous Verdict, and Execution Sentence. What we have here are three all single target abilities. However, one is useful in multi-target because it's not only single target, and that is Zeal. So if you're in a purely multi-target situation, Zeal is the best. Purely single target situation, Righteous Verdict and Execution Sentence are the choices. However, Righteous Verdict will perform better than Execution Sentence in most cases. You would have to simulate that, but my informed opinion is to go ahead and pick Righteous Verdict at this point in the expansion. The next row, we have Fires of Justice, Blade of Wrath, and Empyrean Power. In a complete pure AoE environment, Empyrean Power is fine to take. However, it is a bit underwhelming at this point. But again, pure AoE, it's fine to take that. Blade of Wrath is going to be your choice in most cases in AoE and single target. And then Fires of Justice is just a mostly single target talent, although it can have some multi-target usefulness as far as reducing the holy power of an ability. Just does not perform quite as well as Blade of Wrath does. So Blade of Wrath is kind of the consensus pick in the second row. Third row, Fist of Justice, Repentance, Blinding Light, all kind of crowd control abilities that you would use based on the content that you're doing. Next row, we have Unbreakable Spirit, Cavalier, Eye for an Eye. I'm using Cavalier for the movement speed. Unbreakable Spirit is a very safe talent to use, however, and synergizes well with one of the conduits that we'll talk about later. Next row, we have Divine Purpose, Holy Avenger, and Seraphim. This is another row where it's actually really well balanced. Overall, Divine Purpose and Seraphim will simulate very close to each other. Holy Avenger is a little bit behind, so we could see a buff there since it's actually an ability that you have to click. But Purpose and Seraphim are very close to each other. I do recommend just picking Divine Purpose because of that. It's also very easy to do. You don't have to manage it. It doesn't cost Holy Power like Seraphim does. So Divine Purpose is generally going to be the best choice in that row. Next row, we have Selfless Healer, Justicar's Vengeance, Healing Hands. They're all heals. I would say to choose the one that makes the most sense for you. Healing Hands and Selfless Healer are going to be the best. Selfless Healer is going to be the one that's chosen the most. In the last row, we have Sanctified Wrath, Crusade, and Final Reckoning. Sanctified Wrath is the generally best choice. Crusade is fairly close to Sanctified Wrath. You could simulate that if you'd like. And then Final Reckoning kind of works really well with Execution Sentence. It is a high skill play, I would say, to take those together. They both have 1 minute cooldown. They synergize well with each other. And you just want to get as much damage into your Execution Sentence as possible. So that's why Final Reckoning can be so powerful there. You actually Final Reckoning and then Execution Sentence and then do as much damage as you possibly can. And it does work out, but it generally simulates very similar to a Righteous Verdict, Sanctified Wrath combination, which takes almost no skill to do. I don't want to say that too loud because I don't want them to nerf that. But so it generally is going to be the best choice. So generally speaking, in most situations, you'd go Righteous Verdict, Blade of Wrath, Fist of Justice, Unbreakable Spirit, Divine Purpose, Selfless Healer, Sanctified Wrath. So very generally speaking, that's what you would do. If you want some more nuance, you would have to simulate it, but just giving you some guidelines there on the talents. Next up, we'll talk a little bit about the ability priority. Some people would call this rotation, but we don't really have rotations in 2020. You're basically using whatever ability is up at the time. That's the best ability to use. I will frame this through the eyes of a Kyrian or Venthyr, and I'll give you a little bit of a tip if you're a Kyrian using the Ringing Clarity Conduit as well in this, since that's what I'm playing. Number one would be Ashen Hallow. So this would be if you're a Venthyr. You'd want to use that when it's up. Obviously, when you're going to get the uptime from it, you won't want to use it if you're going to have to be running out of it for some reason, although it's quite large. Ashen Hallow, number one. Avenging Wrath, if you have 3 or more Holy Power. Templar's Verdict, if you're at max Holy Power. Divine Toll, if you're... this applies Judgment, remember, so it does count as a Judgment. You don't want to judge Divine Toll after you cast Judgment. That wouldn't make any sense. So you do want to keep that in mind. However, this is a little tip I'll give you. So when you start a fight, something you can do, especially because Avenging Wrath is not on the GCD anymore, you can actually Avenging Wrath, Hammer of Wrath, especially if you're using the Mad Paragon legendary, which extends your Avenging Wrath with use of Hammer of Wrath. So you could use Avenging Wrath and Hammer of Wrath basically at the same time, for all intents and purposes, and then go ahead and Divine Toll if you're using the Ringing Clarity Conduit. This has a chance to basically give you the full Holy Power there, and then you can go ahead and start doing the normal rotation. That's just an option. It feels really good when it works. If it doesn't work, then it's a little bit more awkward, and you might have to. So let's say it doesn't proc, and you just get the 1 extra. Let's say then you use Hammer of Wrath, Divine Toll, Blade of Justice, then you're at 5. And then you can start from there. But it's up to you. It's kind of a risky play in some ways, but it is at the end of the day, it's only going to change your DPS by a little bit if you do want to take that chance. So I'll go through the first 4 again since I threw that tip in there. Ashen Hallow, Avenging Wrath with 3+, Templar's Verdict at max, Divine Toll if you're Kyrian, Wake of Ashes, Hammer of Wrath, Blade of Justice. I keep calling it Blade of Wrath. Blade of Justice, Judgment, Crusader Strike if it has 2 charges, Templar's Verdict at non-max Holy Power, which would have to be 3 or 4, and then Consecration, and then Crusader Strike with 1 charge. I'm not going to lie, guys, I've actually been using Crusader Strike with 1 charge over Consecration just because I hate pressing Consecration. It doesn't feel good to press, especially a single target. I should mention this is specifically for single target. We will talk a little bit about multi-target now. Basically, you just sub in Divine Storm for Templar's Verdict. So, Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm at 5 Holy Power, Divine Storm lower down at 3 or 4 Holy Power. Consecration becomes a little bit more useful, especially as the targets increase. Consecration becomes more and more useful. So that's going to move up the list. It at least will move above Crusader Strike, for example. Keeping it down, it becomes more important than that. And so it's exactly the same essentially, except for Consecration becomes more important. And you'd use Divine Storm instead of Templar's Verdict. So pretty dang simple as far as that goes. Next, we will talk about generalized stat priority. Again, there are no real stat priorities now. We kind of understand that it's kind of just based on your gear. You want to wear the best gear that you have that'll do the most damage in most cases. So basically, I'm just going to go through and give you a very generalized stat. You have to simulate this to know for sure. But I will give you very generalized things to shoot for right now. This is 9.0, still fairly early in Castle Nathria. These are some targets you can try to shoot for, okay? So for Critical Strike, I would say 18 to 27-ish. I think those are obtainable numbers, at least through Castle Nathria. 18 to 27-ish. 27 is probably a bit too high, maybe 18 to 25, just as far as being obtainable. Those are some generalized guidelines to go to. So maybe you'd say, okay, I want to get up to at least 18% crit. Haste, I would say 12-13% would be somewhere where you would want to get to. Again, that's just something you can shoot for. Maybe you're way above that. That means maybe you can afford to lose a little bit of haste and be fine. Mastery, I would say 35%. Mastery is generally going to be a good stat throughout the entire expansion. Versatility is our least important stat. It'll simulate well in certain situations. It simulates pretty decent for me right now because my mastery and crit are really high and my haste is really low. So haste is my best right now, for example. So versatility is generally just going to be a filler stat for you. Your piece of gear has it on, fine. If it's a lot more strength, strength is your best thing. As far as this probably entire expansion goes, but at least this first patch, strength is your best thing. So after strength, generally speaking, I would say haste, mastery, crit kind of equal verse. And then at some point your haste is going to be too high, and then it's not going to be the number. It's not going to be number one anymore. But just giving you some generalized things there for those people who don't want to just hear simulate my character, simulate my character. Next, let's talk a little bit about legendaries. We're only going to mention two of these because, frankly, it's hard to craft a bunch of legendaries right now, and basically these are the two best in most situations. So number one, we have the Mad Paragon. So the Mad Paragon is, it could be feet or belt. I have mine on my belt. And this can be from the Great Vault. So you get a quest to complete a Great Vault, and then you'll get the Mad Paragon memory, take it to the Rune Carver, and now you can create the Mad Paragon. This was first available week 3. You put your stats on it, whatever. I have crit haste on it because that's what I wanted at the time. And I'm really thankful I put the haste on it at this point. And what this does is it extends the duration of by Avenging Wrath or Crusade by 1 second when you use Hammer of Wrath. And Hammer of Wrath does 30% additional damage. So it's quite strong. It actually goes pretty well with the Venthyr one, although Ashen Hollow. Although I will say most of the time when you use Ashen Hollow, you're going to have your wings up anyways, so you're pretty much going to have Avenging Wrath up either way. But in theory, it's good. So Mad Paragon, this is your best overall legendary. It's best single target by a little bit, and it's decent for AoE as well. However, the other AoE one is Tempest of the Lightbringer. That drops from Spires of Ascension dungeon, I do believe, and Memory of the Lightbringer's Tempest. And what this does is it projects a storm of your Divine Storm forward, and it does additional damage of your Divine Storm as well. So this is great for AoE, it's great for open world, it's great for Torghast. It's a really great legendary overall. If you went ahead and made this one before you could get Mad Paragon, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, it's not helpful for single target, but for pretty much everything else in the game, it's really, really good. So that's a great legendary to get started and get going as well. So Mad Paragon, and then Tempest of the Lightbringer. I think Lightbringer could be legs and waist or something like that. I know it's waist for sure. I believe it's legs and waist for Tempest of the Lightbringer. So those are your options there. The last thing we're going to talk about in this guide is our conduits. So I'm not going to get too much into the soulbinds especially since I'm not including the Night Fae and Necrolords in this. But for the Kyrian and Venthyr, I will say Nadja is a very good one, and then Pelagos is a very good one. So just the very basic ones, they're good. As far as conduits go, let's talk about the ret ones specifically. We have Expurg, Truce Awake, Templar's Vindication, and Virtuous Command. Out of those 4, Templar's Vindication is pretty much the best single target one. Expurg is actually really good on cleave if you simulate it. So like single target cleave, so maybe like Huntsman in the raid. Expurg is actually pretty good there if you simulate it. Truce Wake is good for really big AoE that the stuff's going to live for at least 6 seconds. So it can't be stuff that dies instantly because it has to burn for the 6 seconds afterwards. And so the more targets, the better, and they have to live longer than 6 seconds. Then it becomes a pretty useful AoE one, but still not that great, honestly. And then Virtuous Command is just a little bit behind Templar's Vindication. So there is a bit of a hierarchy there, but they all are very similar, and they all are somewhat balanced overall. Truce Wake is kind of the worst one, but none of them are terrible. You can kind of use whatever one you want. I will say specifically, because I'm Kyrian, the Regain Clarity is really good for Kyrian. You probably just want to socket that in, especially if you have a decent one. I only have a 184 myself. That's still a 52% chance to cast 3 extra times on your main target. It makes your Kyrian ability a very strong single target ability, and it's just generally good, and I definitely recommend using it. So that's a really good one as well. We will talk about Finesse and Endurance real quick. So in Finesse, I would say the best one is Light Barding. That increases the duration of Divine Steed, so more speed for you as a slow Ret Paladin. And then the one I like Endurance the most, some people like Golden Path. I prefer Divine Call. Divine Shield's remaining cooldown is reduced by 5 seconds. When you take damage, it occurs every X amount of seconds depending on your level of Conduit. So that's my favorite one. More Divine Shields can be good in Mythic Plus, can be good in raiding as well. and it's just generally the best one that I find most useful, because I like to use my Divine Shield pretty aggressively, whether that's aggressively to avoid damage or aggressively to do damage. So definitely want to at least think about using that one over Golden Path. But those are pretty much the two best options there. But that's it for this video. I think that's pretty comprehensive there. Pretty much got to everything I wanted to get to. Good luck to everybody. Rep Paladin's pretty strong right now. I'm enjoying it quite a bit myself. And yeah, so as always, I do ask you to subscribe to the channel because it helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.